Welcome back to the Soaring Show. As we're now deep in autumn, it's usually the time where most glider pilots start thinking about putting their toys away and longingly await the return of spring. Other glider pilots take this time as an opportunity to reflect on their year and plan for the next one. So, with that in mind, let's reflect on the season of 2025. Now, in the next episode, we're going to be staying on this theme when we speak to Freddie about his historic 1,000-kilometer flight right here in the UK. But right now, I want to focus on Tim Fletcher, who earlier this year managed to get a podium finish at the World Gliding Championship in Tabor, despite this only being his second World Gliding Championship, and with the added pressure of balancing family life with a young child at home. We started our conversation with a little throwback and an introduction from Tim.
The last time I saw you was in Ostrup in 2018 when I was at the beginning of my filming journey, and you were, well, quite far into your gliding journey. But I think it's a nice change of pace of where you were then in 2018 and where you are now today. So I think the first thing would be to tell everyone who you are and what you've been doing the last few years and how the world's went.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks, Dorian. So yeah, I've actually, since you mention it, now that I think about it, my old Labelle has still got a GoPro mount stuck on where you stuck it on in Austria. Actually, that's still there to this day. And my dad still has a share in that glider. So, but yeah, that's good. So yeah, so people probably already know me. I'm Tim Fletcher. Been flying gliders for about 18 years now, something like that. Got into the juniors when I was a bit late on, actually. I think I was about 23 when I really started competition seriously. So a little bit late to the party. Started in a K6 CR. Was bright orange, couldn't miss it. That was great fun. And then progressed to the Labelle, which had a few successes in that. And then, yeah, did the Worlds in Ostro in 2018. As you say, that's the first Worlds I ever did. And since then, I've not done a huge amount of flying, not as much as I'd like, family and job and stuff getting in the way, but that's all part of life. And then, so yeah, as you say, a few weeks ago, flying into Tabor in Czech Republic, that was the second ever Worlds I've done. Yeah, and it was pretty good. I was pretty happy with the result. Obviously, you'd always, unless you win, you can always do a little bit better. But no, I've got to be pleased with the medal. I think for a second ever Worlds, pretty pleased with that. So yeah.
The first few days of the competition didn't quite go to plan, so I wanted to ask Tim how he coped with the mental pressure to stay in the game.
As many people have said, gliding is a game of skill and chance. I think one of the skills there with those first 2 days was trying to take a step back. And I was trying to rack my brain, to be honest, and think, have I just been unlucky or am I doing something wrong? Because clearly, if I was doing something wrong on those first 2 days, I want to change it up. But if I was just a bit unlucky, then the best thing to do is actually not to overthink about it and just keep doing what you're doing, and the results will come back around again. So, to be honest, I wasn't really sure between those two. I did feel like I was being a bit unlucky. I had a few missed climbs where there were gliders I was with who just went a slightly different way to a cloud that looked more or less the same. It was equally off track, and they got a good climb and I didn't, and then never really saw them again. So that can happen on days, and it definitely goes the other way as well. So I was kind of thinking I was probably more unlucky than making mistakes, although I definitely wasn't sure.
And I think that's a great tip. You should analyze your flights at the end of the day to give yourself the opportunity to catch any mistakes or stop yourselves from changing tack just because of some bad luck. But how do you deal with the issue while you're in the cockpit still?
I think I was down about barely 1,000 feet above the ground in a little clearing where there were some landable fields, but around that was just all forest. So I was basically stuck. And, in that moment, my brain was definitely like, oh, not again, a third day of really, this is not going to go well. But again, I just said, really, that doesn't matter. You've got to put it out of your mind. The only thing that mattered in that very moment was finding a good climb to get up. And then it's a long flight, anything can happen. And sure enough, I managed to find a climb, and then some of the later gliders, later starters came in behind me, joined me, and it actually turned into quite a fast gaggle. I was definitely doing a lot of the leading, found a few of the good climbs, but equally some of the other gliders around me were being quite pushy as well, which was really helpful. A long flight, and long story short, ended up, I think I'm right in saying I won that day in the end.
I thought that gave quite a clear picture of how Tim dealt with difficult problems, but I wondered how his decision making changed when he was just in standard flight mode.
If I've been focused on any one thing for too long, I try and take a step back and say, actually, what's the bigger picture? So it could be that maybe you've got really low and you're in like a half knot thermal or something, trying to maximize the climb rate. But then if you do like 10 turns focusing on maximize the climb rate, sometimes I have to say to myself, oh, hang on a minute, look out, check down track. Is there actually a better option now? Or do I need to carry on doing what I'm doing? So sometimes you can get a little bit over focused on one task, which is very easy to do if you're at 500 feet struggling to stay airborne. That there is only one thing you can do in that situation. But yeah, trying to remind myself to just keep taking a step back and check if there's anything else I should be doing at any one moment in time is definitely something I try and do.
We then spoke about differences when it comes to flying in Europe versus flying in the UK, and how you would gather that information and how you would come up with tactics.
The soaring opportunities and what worked well over in Czech Republic was quite different from the UK and what I was used to. So the blue days especially, obviously looking at ground features more than the clouds that you would be on a nice Q day. And what I found in Czech Republic was a lot of the forests worked really well as good thermal sources, particularly the big ones. Almost the bigger the better, to be honest. The only trouble was the bigger the forest, it was hard to know exactly where the core was going to be. But that's very different. And that was kind of all times of day as well. So it could be like 11:30 in the morning, 12 o'clock, and the forests were already really good. And if you went over towns and villages, they just didn't work at all.
How do you even find that information? Because it's not in the Bronze and Beyond book. I've read that thing several times. That information is not there.
Yeah, no, it's not. I guess there's a few things. So everyone's different, right? So some clubs, they're fortunate enough to have a lot of really experienced, great competition pilots. I won't name drop any because I'll probably leave some out, but you know who I'm talking about. And they run soaring courses, things like that. From where I started gliding, so I started with Bath University, who are affiliated with Bath Wilts and North Dorset Gliding Club. And there are a few pilots who maybe do the odd regionals, things like that, but there aren't really any nationals or world's competition pilots. So a lot of the learning I did was actually just by flying loads, to be honest. And there's really no substitute for practice, I guess, and experience in these things. There are definitely some things you can learn by, even if you've got some time at home when it's raining or whatever, reading books or just thinking about things on the ground. Even during COVID, I actually did a bit of flying on Condor, because what else were you going to do when you're sat at home in lockdown? And actually, I did learn a few things through that, actually, which maybe not directly applicable to flying, but they still are relevant. So things like, your score is relative, if you're going to land out, it's relative your distance to the turn point. But if you can just like clip a sector, suddenly you get credited with all that extra distance to the turn point. That was definitely something I learned. I would say I had that in my mind from doing some Condor flying, when effectively that actually was what helped me win the nationals at Aston Down, I think it was. On the last day, all I could do was just make it to the sector, but because it was an into-wind leg, it credited me with an extra like 20k into wind with the windy capping. That was probably the difference between me finishing first and second overall. So there's a few things you can kind of just have in your mind from just learning it on the ground, basically. But really, beyond that, there's no substitute for just practicing, to be honest. Getting up there, experiencing what this particular cloud looks like and how good a climb rate it gives, or what this ground feature looks like, and does that give good lift or not. That all just comes by trying things, exploring and learning, basically.
And then we spoke about balancing family life with competitive gliding.
I would classify you as a gliding survivor. Jake is in the same boat. He's also a gliding survivor, and I am reaching the age of being a gliding survivor. Most people in the late 20s start looking at buying homes, starting families, and the classic thing is they fall off the face of the earth. You don't see them for 20 years, and then they come back when their kids are heading to university or got their first jobs and stuff like that. So you said your wife's very supportive about you going to the competition. Is she still supportive after the 3 weeks? Or
Although I've got some brownie points to replenish. I've definitely used them all up, that's for sure. But no, yeah, she's still very supportive. But it's one of those things. It's a balance. So I guess I guess I'm a gliding survivor, as you put it. I definitely don't fly as much as I used to, so I balance it. But to be honest, I just love gliding so much. I would find it very difficult to give it up completely, even if I'm just kind of keeping it ticking over, which, to be honest, is kind of what I feel like I've been doing more or less since Poland, really. Certainly until, well, the Worlds, which is the last time. Then, the other week, the most flying I've done really in a long time. So I think, I mean, I think I'd have to check this, but I think I'm right in saying since Poland, outside of competitions, I've done like 4 or 5 cross-country flights before this year. So really just keeping things ticking over, to be honest. So gliding survivor, but just keeping it at a low level, basically. Not able to give it up, but equally not able to fully commit at the moment. But yeah, this year was a bit different because I was entering the Worlds. I was like, I really need to make a huge effort. And, I said to my wife, it's not just the 3 weeks to really do it properly. I need to at least do a handful of cross countries before, make sure I'm back up to speed, well practiced, all the rest of it. So this year's been a little bit different. I've done, I think, a total of 3 or 4 cross countries or something before Czechia, which is unusual for me. I don't normally manage that many in a year outside of comps. So yeah, that's it. I do hope. I think my long-term plan, right, is to pick it up to the sort of level, back in, I guess, my heyday of the juniors in 2014 when I was doing like best part of 100 hours a year or something. I'd like to get back to that level, but realistically, that's probably not going to be for a while to come. So in the meantime, though, I enjoy any bit of flying I can do. I enjoy, so I'm quite happy just keeping it ticking over, to be honest.
Do you find you have to find little adventures in gliding to keep it exciting? Because the reason I asked it, because I found I've had like a 2 or 3 year stint when I was at university where I didn't really have enough money to do gliding, so I was just ticking it over. It wasn't a family thing. I just didn't have the money to fly. But I found if I just go to the gliding club and just do your, typical local soaring or just that sort of stuff, it got dull. But what kept it going for me is going to the winter series, is going to different gliding clubs and trying out different spaces. What makes it keep working for you when you can't do it as much as you'd like to?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's always just a next level you can achieve, basically. So, if you haven't done a cross country yet, the first thing is you want to go and do your first cross country, right? But then when you've done that, you're just looking to do even bigger distances, faster speeds. That's one of the definitely big motivations. It would be great to do 1,000K one day or something in the UK. That you're talking about very few and far between days where that's possible, but something like that would be a huge aspiration to work to. I haven't actually done a 750 yet, so baby steps, right? But there's always a next level you can push to. So that's one thing. And then there's also then different types of flying. I mean, you mentioned yourself going to like the winter series, for example. So cross country flying in thermals in the summer is quite different from going ridge bashing in the winter, or wave flying, for example. I've done a fairly limited amount of wave flying, actually, so that could definitely be one thing for me to kind of keep things fresh. We talked about changing glider, so switching from the Lebel to the LS7, that was definitely kind of a step change in glider performance. Suddenly I'm flying 10, 15, 20 knots faster than I would in the Lebel. That kind of is a new, fresh motivation, keeps things interesting. So yeah, there's lots of different directions you can take it. I also do, it's not the main thing I do, but I do a bit of instructing as well. That's kind of also interesting. It's for me not the main thing about gliding. I mean, really what I love about gliding is cross country and competitions, but nonetheless, I do find it quite rewarding, particularly with, there could be someone new to gliding. Maybe they've only done like 3 or 4 flights, but actually they fly as if they've almost ready for solo. It's really rewarding to kind of fly with those kind of people. And you almost, before I've even explained how to thermal, they're kind of just doing it. And it's like, well, it's really good to see. So there's things like that, which kind of are a bit different and kind of keep you interested, I guess.
So what was the dynamic then with your dad? Because obviously your dad was a pilot as well and you were a child at some point. Do you remember like your dad disappearing for weekends or?
Yeah, so my dad was probably in that category of people who stopped gliding when they started a family, really. So he did do when I was young and growing up. He was just doing. He had a PPL and was flying like Grog 109s. So it's kind of funny actually the way it worked out. So you have a different perspective when you're young. So I always loved going up flying with him in the Grog 109, and then when I was about, I think I was about 14, 15, something like that, he went back to gliding. And initially, although he could take me flying in the Grob with his PPL as a passenger, and I used to enjoy that, when he went into gliding, he wasn't, at least at that time, he wasn't an instructor. So suddenly I couldn't go flying with him anymore. So in my mind, I can't remember how old I was. Maybe I wasn't quite that old. Maybe it was more like 12 or 13. I don't know. But I almost had this weird grudge against gliding that, oh, now dad's doing gliding, I can't go flying with him anymore. Never quite thinking, oh, why don't I just learn to fly myself? Which is a bit silly in hindsight, but it's funny how your mind works when you're younger. Um, so yeah, but then of course, once I got into it myself, that grudge immediately disappeared, and it was like, oh, gliding's amazing. I'm going to do this for the rest of my life, probably, sort of thing.
Well, here you are with a
And
medal.
here I am, still keeping it going. Yeah,
Still keep it going. Well, the thing is, you deserve a massive congratulations, not only because of the performance at the Worlds, because again, a medal at the Worlds is massively impressive, but also you managed to do it with limited flying and having a young family. And as I think, yeah, your wife definitely deserves a medal as well for keeping the fort down. As
yeah, absolutely. I've said that the medal is half hers for sure, if not maybe 3/4 hers. And I'll tell her that a lot as well. So make sure I keep earning my brownie points. But no, definitely, yeah. I mean, I'm not the only one gone. There's other people. I mean, I know Jez, for example, and Lee, who are at the Worlds. They've got family in Howard. So there's I'm not the only one with a young family who are managing to make it work. But it is difficult for sure.
so, I think what we managed to get across here is just because you've started a family and bought a house and things like that doesn't mean it's the end of flying. You have to hang up your boots. You can still do it, and it can still be fun. You just
Absolutely, yeah.
make some
Yeah,
sacrifices.
and it's almost like when I do go flying, it's almost even better when I do, because I'm nowhere near being bored of it. Because if you do 1,000 hours a year, there's a danger you might get bored of it. But when you're only managing to do 30 or 40 hours a year, you, every day that you turn up, it's like, wow, I'm so glad to be here. This is amazing. I mean, I always find it's always a great feeling actually after a long winter of like not little to no, certainly thermal soaring and cross country thermal, let's say. That first day in like whenever it happens to be in the given year, ideally February or March, but in my case with availability and weather and all the rest of it, sometimes it ends up being like April or May. But that first day is always just like an amazing feeling, like getting back in the saddle in a nice climb, Vario's beeping away, and you're like, oh yeah, back home again. It's always a really great feeling.
I hope you found that useful and that it inspires you to plan your 2026 season based on what happened this year and maybe in previous years as well. If you'd like to see the full uncut interview, you can find that on our Patreon, where we also regularly post our training videos that we film with G. Dale. Or if you'd like to watch another interview, we recently did one with Liz Sparrow. Thank you for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe, as that really helps the channel grow and create more content like this. Thank you for watching.